All right, for more insight, Prerna Singh, Mahatma Gandhi Associate Professor of Political Science and International Studies at Brown University, is joining us right now. Professor Singh, just briefly explain to us the significance of this temple and what was Prime Minister Modi aiming to achieve by consecrating an incomplete temple? What was the rush?
So, on the one hand, as you yourself mentioned, the inauguration of this temple marks a watershed moment in Indian history in many ways. It undermines one of the founding constitutional principles of India, which is that it is a secular country that has equal rights for citizens of all religions. And it sends a very clear signal to India's Muslim minority that has been the victim of discrimination, and often violent discrimination, over the duration of the regime in power and of course also previously. On the other hand, as you also mentioned, it is very important because in many ways, the building of this temple represents the culmination of a decades-long project of the construction of a Hindu identity by the ruling BJP and its many associate organizations, the RSS, the VHP, and it delivers on this long-held promise. And in many ways, those triumphant scenes that you just saw on the streets of Ayodhya today represent the success of this project. They represent the internalization of this Hindu identity. And so on the one hand, it is the undermining of secularism. It also, as you also mentioned, shows the undermining of institutions such as the judiciary, whose judgment actually cleared the path for the building of this temple. And on the other hand, it shows how this project, which had the kind of other main moment was the destruction of the mosque in 1992. But this is a very different India in which this temple is being inaugurated today. 1992 was very much a site of conflict and of this Hindu identity that was just being mobilized. What you're seeing today is the ascendance, the hegemony, the triumph of this Hindutva Rashtra, this Hindu identity that has been so central to the ruling party and the Prime Minister.
Professor Singh, I take your point about the potential impact on secular democracy in India, but I want to ask you about what critics are saying as well, about how Narendra Modi has once again crossed that line between state and religion because he actually performed the rituals himself. I mean, do you see it that way as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for pointing that out. I mean, this is unprecedented in the history of India and also really in the history of a secular country that the head of the executive should cast himself and indeed take on the symbolism of a high priest of a religion. It is also notable that it has a certain drawing on other religions such as Christianity and ironically Islam in a way to kind of cast Ayodhya, the birthplace of Lord Ram, who is an incarnation of Vishnu and one of the leading pantheons in Hinduism, to cast Ayodhya as a kind of Rome or a kind of Mecca. And so it is the symbolism absolutely is central, but in many ways, it is the erasure. I wouldn't even say the blurring. It's now got to the point of the erasure of the line between politics and religion. I just want to mention that this is not the first time we've seen it. India's new parliament was inaugurated with, in some ways, quite resonant scenes of the Prime Minister being surrounded by Hindu priests, which we have never seen before in Indian history, in Indian politics. And so this is a continuation of that, but an intensification of that same trend.
I mean, given the timing of it all, as you mentioned, many are calling this a purely political spectacle. How much of a boost will it actually give Mr. Modi and his party the gain, and what challenges might they face?
I think you're absolutely right to put this in the context of the upcoming general elections in which the ruling regime is seeking a third, regime, a tenure in power. But I do want to point out that unlike some of the other moves that we have seen, I don't think we can see this as a purely electoral strategy. The timing of it, the consecration, the opening, the inauguration, all of those are certainly inextricably related to the upcoming elections, and it is certainly the hope of the present regime that it will lead to a boost in their popularity and in some ways compensate for the other very real economic and social issues upon which there remains much to be delivered. But on the other hand, I was on your show a few weeks ago talking about the renaming of India as Bharat. And I said how that I saw as a very electoral, strategic, instrumental ploy or move. I think it's important to separate the present temple inauguration from that. Insofar as you yourself pointed out, this is really the culmination of 4 decades in which the Ram Janmabhoomi movement has been building and actively constructing tempo and mobilizing Hindus, and in many ways, really the culmination of a century-long project in which the RSS is almost 100 years old. And so I think it is important to see it in the timing of the elections and the electoral gains that it promises among a radicalized and Hindu majority and a highly polarized political climate. But on the other hand, it is important to also see it as this culmination of this ideological battle that has been waged now quite successfully.
Professor Singh, I hear what you're saying, and again, it does seem as though, the warnings from you, the advice from you, may not be heeded by the BJP. But I'm going to ask you now: is there other potential blind sides that the party is not aware of that may, occur or take place down the road?
I think that's a very good question. I think in many ways it will be, I think on the one hand, it will be a question which is a broader question that we ask in politics, which is how far will symbolism take you? How far will the literal construction of such monuments, the transforming of an identity politics, symbolism, the politics of exclusionary nationalism, which of course is not unique to India. We see it playing out in the United States, where I teach, and in many other parts of the world. So the question really is, will questions of identity politics, symbolism, exclusionary nationalism be able to carry the day against very real issues of rising poverty, rising unemployment, malnutrition, and stagnating social indicators, an all-time high, for instance, in the lack of female labor force participation, among a plethora of other issues. So will such identity exclusionary, nationalist, symbolist strategies yield electoral dividends? I think that the blind side in some ways, or the challenge, is if such social issues are actually activated by the opposition, and if the opposition can find a way to construct a narrative that returns not just to the constitutional principles of secularism, but also highlights some of the failings of the present regime.
All right, Professor Singh, we'll have to leave it there for now. Well, thank you very much for your insight this morning. Prerna Singh, Mahatma Gandhi Associate Professor of Political Science and International Studies at Brown University.